Today on CityCast Portland, we're talking about how a North Portland affordable housing development for seniors is sitting empty, which type of homeless shelters are more successful in moving people into permanent housing, and whether Metro should be diverting supportive housing service dollars to buy existing cheap residential properties. Joining me on this week's Friday News Roundup are KOIN 6 investigative reporter Elise Haas and our very own executive producer John Atariani. It's Friday, April 26th. I'm Claudia Meza, and this is what Portland's talking about. Welcome, everyone, to the Friday News Roundup. Elise, John, thanks for hanging out with us this morning.
Hello.
Great to be here.
Yeah, I believe this is the first time we've had a television journalist on our Friday News Roundup. We're excited you're here.
I like to be able to be the first here. This fun. It's always a good time to be, oh my gosh, the mayor's office is calling me right now. I will put it on pause, though. We will
Is that
not.
Cody?
It is Cody. It is Cody.
Will you pick it up and ask him to get back to us about 503 Day?
Hold on. Hey, Cody. No worries at all. I mean, it is because I'm actually on the podcast right now. But if you want to send me an email, okay, what's the numbers?
Don't forget about 503 Day.
Well, you said 100. Say that one more time. Great. Wow. And then also, CityCast was wondering if you could get back to them about 503. Is that what you said,
503 Day, thank you.
Yes. He's giggling. He says he'll get back to you.
Thank you, Cody.
All right. Thanks, Cody. All right, bye.
Oh my gosh, that was staged, wasn't it?
Perfect.
you planned that.
We've got even more good numbers to talk about later for your guys' stories. Okay.
Oh, sweet. Oh my God. That was amazing. Okay. For all of our new listeners, today is the day we break down some of the biggest local stories of the week with some of the best and brightest journalists in town. But before we head over to the news, I like to ask our guests an opening question so you can get to know them a little bit better. And at least since this is your first time on the show, I wanted to tailor our opening questions to share some of your hidden talents. I heard you're super good at making homemade sushi and you like to skateboard. I've seen pictures, so I know you're not putting on airs. Like, what's your favorite sushi roll to make?
Okay, so I think one of my favorite things to do is being able to put like the avocado on top because that's what really makes it fancy. But I worked at a sushi restaurant growing up as a kid, and so I was a server, but I watched all of the sushi chefs. I'd be like doing like my calculus homework while watching them, roll sushi, and then I'm like, I can do that. But yeah, so basically what you do for the avocados, you slice it really thinly, you put it between saran wrap to then lay it over the sushi roll, and I guess that's just my one touch that I think makes it look professional.
I hear what you're saying.
Oh my gosh, do I have to answer this question too?
No, John.
Okay,
you're not
thank heavens.
You're not the guest. You're here every day. John, you're so cute. Okay, I'm sorry.
I was just imagining how I was going to tap dance into saying how to make sushi.
He's like, I like buying it at the supermarket.
Yeah, exactly. Not 7-Eleven. 7-Eleven sushi is out.
Oh my God, John, you're so funny. Okay, anyhow, so my opening question is trying to guess the hidden talents of our city council members. Ooh. And we're more making them up than guessing correctly. So pick 2 or 3 council members, which could include the mayor, and tell me what you think they'd be super good at or what you wish they would be super good at. And for those listening at home, our city council is made up of Mayor Ted Wheeler, Commissioners Rene Gonzalez, Dan Ryan, Mingus Maps, and Carmen Rubio. I can go first if you guys need to gather your thoughts, but I'm also happy for you guys to jump in.
I can jump in. I'm thinking of Rene Gonzalez and the time that he spent as a soccer coach before he was a council member. So I'm going to guess that he's like also a champion hacky sacker. Like back in the 90s, like a younger guy. I bet he's got like sick hacky sack moves up his sleeve.
I mean, that tracks. I feel like that makes logical sense.
Well, here's just the first thing that popped into my head. And I don't know if it just brings me joy or makes me giggle, but I envision Mayor Ted Wheeler being really, like, in his spare time, doing watercoloring. But, like, watching little TikTok videos for, like, how-to, and then just, painting little vignettes of the city.
Oh, of the city, that's so cute.
But I feel like watercoloring is, like, the new thing now. So, yeah, maybe he's doing that in his spare time. I'll ask him in my next sit-down.
Yes, please do. So I chose the commissioners that are running for mayor. So no disrespect to Commissioner Ryan or Mayor Wheeler, because I'm sure they both have a ton of amazing hidden talents. Okay, Commissioner Gonzalez looks like he would be really good at karaoke. I mean, I want him to be secretly really good at singing, operatic even. Commissioner Maps looks like he would have a very green thumb. Like he could like grow citrus in the Northwest. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, his backyard can
Right.
handle it.
Possibly even good at Legos. I don't know. But here's the one that I was like really thinking about. Okay, I think that it would be amazing if Commissioner Rubio was insanely good at like Call of Duty or any other like broy online game. You know, where people wear those headsets and talk shit to each other.
Yes.
I want her to have like an intimidating and totally unserious handle like La Llorona 69. La Llorona being a vengeful Mexican ghost who comes for your children. We had her on the show and she was so sweet and sincere that like her being kind of a meme.
She's just got this cold-blooded streak. Yeah.
Just a badass gamer would be the surprise plot twist of my life. Like I would live for it.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, she's such like a little lady. I mean, I think that she's actually shorter than me, which is saying something because I'm like 4'11". So
Is she?
to see her gaming hard, yeah, she's a little lady.
Yeah, it's just super game. You know what I mean? Just like has the
Yeah.
sickest skins. It's just like out there. I don't know. I want that. Well, thank you guys. Appreciate your input on the council members' hidden talents. Before we move on, just a reminder that we are in the final days of accepting 503-day submissions, either for what you'll be doing on May 3rd or for a theme song. At least if you're not aware, 503-day is a very real holiday where we celebrate all that we love about living in Portland. But since it's a new holiday, we're taking suggestions for like official customs or just like, what are you doing on May 3rd, you know?
Yeah, okay. I mean,
Think about it because I'm going to ask you about it.
okay, I don't have plans yet on May 3rd, but I will.
I'll ask you later. All right. On to the news of the week. Elise, you're bringing us a story you worked on about an empty, affordable housing development in North Portland, right? So what's going on?
Yes. So I'm kind of resurrected this story from the dead, if you will. So there is a 100-unit affordable housing apartment complex in North Portland's Piedmont neighborhood. And that's the thing. It's been vacant for 3 years, which is insane. Previously, it was home to, seniors. Someone who had lived there for over a decade. The woman who I talked to, her name was Nancy Kincaid. She called this place her home, and then the neighbors there, her family. So it was back in 2021 when we really started talking about this, and it was breaking news because there was a Legionnaire's outbreak, and that sickened a dozen people, and it killed a person. So very big deal here. But Legionella, it's not spread from person to person. It's really spread through water vapors. So at that point, they didn't know what was going on. So the safest bet was to displace all of these residents. They scattered them throughout all of these different non-affordable apartment throughout the city. And now the county is just subsidizing and trying to pay up all of their rents instead. So that's not ideal. And then really all of these residents are waiting in limbo, wondering if they'll ever be able to go back to their home and to their community. So no one in authority has ever figured out what the source of the Legionella was, which is also questionable and concerning. Like, is anyone going to try and figure it out? But with that said, at the end of the day, the public perception of this building is that it's contaminated. And so the nonprofit who's running it has been trying to raise funds to update the water system and fix all the plumbing. They've tried to talk to funders for about a year. The city talked to me and they said that the city stepped up recently in January of this year being like, hey, here's $2.4 million that was actually Carmen Rubio.
Yeah.
Her office squared it away and was like, hey, you can have $2.4 million to put towards your project. But the city told me that the overall cost for the water system is $7 million. So that makes them $5 million short. So the nonprofit goes to the state being like, hey, they tried a couple times to get grants from the state and the state turned them down. So that leads to, problem because the nonprofit is like, I'm sitting on a vacant building. It is burning a hole in my pocket. They can't do that forever, right? That's not sustainable. So that now there's all these questions swirling and rumors and this and that of like, who's going to buy Rosemont Court? Because they are itching to sell it. There's also talks of turning it into permanent supportive housing for people coming out of homelessness. While none of that's solid yet, it all just still leaves questions for the people who were supposed to live there, like Nancy Kincaid, who I originally interviewed. That still leaves people like her high and dry. So there's more to it, but I guess what are your guys' initial reactions to it?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I think later on in this conversation, Claudia, when we get to your story, we're going to get to the cost associated with developing affordable housing, which is like the numbers of how much it costs to build affordable housing in Portland right now are bonkers. But, $7 million, a lot of money. I do not have $7 million to give to this project. I'm sure that it's going to take some squeezing of a budget somewhere to get it. But $7 million to get like how many units are we talking about here? Like 90?
100.
Yeah, there's 100.
$7 million to get 100 units of affordable housing online is like the best deal imaginable. It is so cheap. And the fact that we're just sort of caught in this like bureaucratic rigmarole is super, super frustrating for me.
I know that you reached out to, the Northwest Housing Alternatives and the state and the county officials and all these agencies that are supposed to be, I don't know, a little bit responsible for affordable housing. Did you hear back from any of them with any updates?
So it's wild. A lot of them did not want to talk to me.
What?
Oh, yeah. So they got back to me very quickly being like, you should talk to somebody else. You should talk to somebody else.
Oh, that's
you should ask
so-
somebody. Yes. So, reach out
That's
to
so Portland.
It is so
It's like so
Portland.
Raven. That's so Portland.
Yes. So that was very on brand. And, but I'm kind of used to that. But it is one of those things where this is a little bit of a complicated case, right? And another thing that's, I guess, worth mentioning is that, let's be real here, like what happened at Rosemont Court is so unprecedented for an affordable housing complex. It's like to get like a Legionnaires outbreak, that is bizarre. That would likely like never really happen at most affordable housing complexes. So because it was so unprecedented, it would take a very unprecedented response to save it in its original form and bring all of those seniors back home. But yeah, so the governor's office sent me off to Department of Human Services, which is the wrong department. They meant to send me to the Housing and Community Services. I reached out to them, no reply, but they might get back to me tonight. And then I reached out to the county, who then was like, you should talk to the nonprofit. And then, so that's just kind of like the finger pointing. Then I reached out to the mayor's office, like, you should talk to Rubio.
Oh my God. I feel like a lot of stuff like that has happened and it always ends up with Rubio. Like her being like, oh, I'm in charge. Okay, well, I just think it's so fun. Sorry, I just think it's so funny. Oh my God.
Yeah. So one last thing I guess I'll say about this, of the overall takeaway for the story, because even though, like, yes, Rosemont Court might be small in and of itself, I think like it's a case in point for the fact that, the city, the county, the state, they have like very specific buckets of money that they can pull from. And the reality for Rosemont Court is that it would be considered a preservation project. And because of that, there's really not a lot of preservation funds going around. On the contrary, there is a lot of money that's flying out the door for affordable housing. As John, I can see the reaction on your face.
Yeah.
Lots of money flying out the door for affordable housing, but it is all earmarked for new construction and new construction only.
Yeah, that's part of my story as well. Yeah, which is ridiculous because this is 100 people displaced.
Yes.
The quotes that you got from Nancy Kincaid were so just like, like straight to the heart. Like she said, it wasn't just a bunch of seniors. We were a family. And I don't know why, just thinking like, no one cares about seniors,
Right?
Like no one cares about us.
We're not giving them the dignity.
Yeah. It's so sad.
Yeah, and she ended it by saying that Rosemont was supposed to be our last stop. And she started crying. And I was just like, oh, Nancy. But yeah, it's really basically, in short, hard to get preservation funding in Oregon, a lot easier to get new construction funding. But we have a lot of, affordable housing that was built in the 70s and needs to be brought up to date. So properties are getting older, they're being neglected, and you need to be able to have a balance of both. And that's what I think the legislature needs to think about, next time around.
Yeah, and I think preservation funding is just such a funny idea that like in the funding model, we're prioritizing the building over the people who like potentially live in the building. And I think back to a lot of the reporting that we've done about certain neighborhoods that have changed in Portland and the sort of intangibles of when you have a bunch of people, especially seniors who are like very bound to a specific neighborhood, and you remove them from that community. There's just no way to like ever recreate that. It's really easy to get caught up in conversations about the cost of like developing new housing versus rehabbing old housing, which is like a very important conversation. But I think like you're saying, Elise, like so much of this is about the people that are at the center of this, that are kind of getting screwed. And that's really frustrating.
Yeah, well said.
Well, thank you so much, Elise, for that story. Oh, we appreciate your reporting on it. I'm excited to see, well, I wouldn't say excited. I look forward to seeing somebody get back to you about it.
Yes, to be continued.
Yeah. All right, well, let's take a quick break here. And when we come back, more headlines of the week. Okay, John, what are you looking at this week?
Yeah, I am digging into a new study about the different types of shelters that are at play in the city and the county. Anybody who's been following the show hears us talking about this all the time. Then this study that I'm looking at breaks it out into 3 different types. Congregate shelters, which are like the traditional big rooms that a bunch of people go into. Motel-style shelters, and then village models. That's like the Safe Rest villages that the city has been working on. This new alternative shelter evaluation report that just came out from Portland State University is really trying to dig into the difference of how these different types of shelters work, how much they cost, the outcomes that they have, just what they're actually doing for people that need to use them. And I think the big takeaway from this study, the congregate shelters, which is the sort of traditional model of how we think of sheltering people, they do a pretty poor job of getting people into permanent housing compared to some of these other models that the city and the region have been implementing over a couple different years. Motel shelters and these village style shelters are actually doing the most to help people. But for me, it's a pretty striking takeaway, and I think in line with the turn that we've seen in this region over the last couple years, where when these village models started coming online, I think a lot of people were like, wait, what the heck is this? This is so strange.
And expensive and yeah.
And they are expensive, but this study breaks out not as expensive as you might think. There's a lot of interesting stuff. Did you guys get a look at this? What did you think?
Well, one thought that I had is I bet Dan Ryan's doing the happy dance because he was the one who came up
I
with
told
that
you
idea.
so.
And he got roasted for so long because the people kept saying it's just a drop in the bucket. You only have 60 people at the Safe Rest Village. So that was my initial reaction when I saw that, and I was like, oh, I bet he's so stoked. I told you so. But the other thing, just I would say from my experience, so I go out a lot to encampments. And interview people. And sometimes it's on camera, sometimes it's off camera. And I will tell you that when I talk to, there's a woman who I vividly remember, her name is Emily. She was off Southeast 82nd, living outside. And, when I was trying to tell her, can I help you? Has anyone come to offer you resources? Do you need me to make a phone call? Those sorts of things. And she was just telling me that, I can't leave my tent because someone's going to steal my stuff. I'm like, but I don't want to be in a congregate shelter because someone's going to steal my stuff. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, have you heard about these alternative shelters down the road in Southeast Gideon off of Powell? She was like, well, I have heard about that. I'm like, does that interest you? And then the conversation changes. Well, yeah, that does sound different. That would be nice. Another man, Chris Harold, he was living right outside and camping outside of Cleveland High School. Same sort of story. Was homeless for years and finally accepted shelter at the alternative shelter site that everyone was up in arms about. And I said, why
Wheelers?
are you? Yes, Wheelers. And I was like, why did you say yes finally? And he kind of said, well, it doesn't seem like there's as many rules. I have a little bit more independence and I like having my own space. So that was enough to change years of somebody making not wanting to come inside. But going back to Cody's phone call, that's what he was calling me about. I wanted to know, John, how successful has that one site been since it opened not even a year ago, right? So it opened probably in July-ish last year. So they've gotten 130 people so far in less than a year into housing, and they've already given out 52 more vouchers to welcome more people in from the streets, and they're going to be moving them in a couple weeks. So that's just one site there. So that kind of speaks volumes to what you're, looking at.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Claudia?
Well, first off, really happy to hear the Joint Office asked for the study to be done. It shows progress in both how the city and county are approaching the issue. The running thread I saw in which shelters seem to be working is, providing smaller, more private quarters where people could regain their human dignity and feel connected to a community. And that environment does seem like it could be more conducive for personalized care and just less stress all around. And not just for the people living there, but like the people providing the care, I imagine. So the care would be even better. That's something that people working at We Shine, a micro village in outer Northeast, pointed out to as well when we were there. You know, we can link to that episode. We got like a tour and stuff, and they flat out said congregate shelters don't work for most people, especially the most vulnerable within the homeless population, which is a growing number.
Yeah, and I think I'm curious what you guys think of this. Like, because we do have congregate shelters, right? And it's like, oh gosh, we have a lot of congregate shelters with hundreds of beds. I feel like this study, on top of saying we need to start leaning into these alternative shelters and pod-like things to give people that privacy, but what can we do then with our congregate shelters to give people those moments of like, I get to be alone in this room and have some quiet time and read for a bit. Or maybe they need to up the staffing there so that way there's a little bit more case management so they don't feel like they're like, a small fish in a big sea. I just feel like it's a sign for let's lean into the alternative shelters, but let's also figure out how can we make congregate shelters more inviting and better for people.
I just don't know if that's a possibility.
Well, one of the things that this report did point out, though, that I thought was interesting was it went to lengths to be like, look, like shelters are not a one-size-fits-all situation by any means. And there are situations where congregate shelters are super, super important. Like it went out of its way to be like, look, when we have inclement weather, when we have like snow or cold emergencies, like congregate shelters are the bomb. So like they do still serve a purpose. But yeah, like we're saying, the sort of experience of being in them is not great. And like the outcomes are not great either, right? And something else that the report points out is that like the operational costs for congregate shelters are relatively low compared to everything else. But since that so many people who go through congregate shelters don't end up in housing anyways and cycle back through the system, that like it's kind of an intangible to calculate the dollar amount, but we do as a society end up spending more in dollars as well as just like gnarly human experiences by sort of having that be the dominant model that we use.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about real quick congregate shelters. I think a lot of people also miss it. It is a bit jail-like. Like they only have X amount of minutes in the bathroom. They can only have X amount of minutes here. Did you know that, Elise? I found that out at We Shine.
No, I didn't know that.
Do you know what I mean? Like, well, they only get like 7 minutes in the bathroom or whatever because there's so many people. They have to share all these facilities. It just, I can't imagine. I also really like what Jason Green said. That's the assistant director of the homelessness research group from Portland State University. He said,
yeah, the guy who did the study. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the guy who did the study. He said, we may pay to have a little bit more for services and staff to make sure people are successfully exiting homelessness. I think that investment is worth it for those people in our community. And he's talking about these alternative shelters, and that is how we should be looking at it. Like when we consider how we take care of our most vulnerable, like an investment, like
right.
Things feel broken at the moment because like right down from like the federal to state to like county and city governments, we've had that lack of investment for decades, and it's been catching up to us. And the pandemic sped things up for sure, but like what we're seeing out in the streets is like not unique to Portland, and it's not like a red or blue state thing. It's like happening everywhere, and it's because we stopped investing in our communities from like the top down.
I think the ultimate goal, like you pretty much mentioned, Claudia, is that if the goal is to get people back into long-term housing, back into employment, if that is feasible for them, like that's the long-term goal, then yeah, obviously from this study and from even just my phone call with Cody, like it's really looking like the alternative shelters is a really viable option.
Mm-hmm.
Something else that I thought was really interesting in this report that like it was very much just sort of an aside, but it did say, it's worth noting that rent vouchers and assistance are cheaper than congregate shelters or villages or motels, and that they are about as effective.
Wow.
Did you say red vouchers?
Rent vouchers.
Oh, rent vouchers. Sorry. I was I felt so out of the loop. I was like, oh my God, there's red vouchers?
Red vouchers. It's really cheap to give everyone a nice red ticket.
I was like about to go. I was like, where did I miss these red vouchers? I felt like every person that we tried to gaslight about 503 Day.
What's so funny is that, Claudia, at first, I thought that he said red too, but then I was listening to the overall context clues. And I was like, he meant rent. He meant rent. And then, yeah.
That's so funny.
Early morning mush mouth, excuse me.
And I did not pay attention. You could see right now just systematically who's a better test taker, and Elise is much better. I get one question and I start spinning and I'm done.
No, honestly, though, like if it's multiple choice, I'm wrecked. Like when I took the driver's license test, like I can't do multiple choice because they try and mess you up on purpose. I literally missed what is a stop sign. So
they were like, what is not a stop sign? Don't. Yes. You know, when they do like triple negatives and you're like, at the end, you're like, I don't know, am I a stop sign? Okay, well, my story this week is from one of our frequent contributors, Willamette Week reporter, Sophie Hooby Ding and Peel. And it's in line with this episode's unintended housing theme. So this week, Sophie looked into how cheap Portland apartments are selling and how Metro is considering buying them and turning them into low-income housing. If you were once like me and were completely not aware of what Metro does, they're the regional government agency that oversees the entire Portland metro area, so they're helping manage the counties that are part of that, so that's Multnomah, Clackamas, and Washington. We have so many local government agencies overseeing Portland, it's probably why everything runs so smooth, don't you think?
Oh my God, yeah.
Anyhow, for the past few months, Metro has been considering placing a measure on the November ballot that would divert some of the supportive housing service dollars from the 3 counties I named earlier, but the supportive housing services tax was voted in to fund more programs and services for the homeless or soon-to-be homeless. So that includes rent assistance, emergency shelter, addiction recovery, like that kind of thing. It wasn't intended to be used for buying housing. Those 3 counties, according to this article, seem to be against it. They don't think there's enough money for all of that, but that's not stopping Metro from exploring the idea, especially now that there are so much cheap properties for sale and they can easily turn into these low-income units. Financially speaking, when they broke down the math, cost-wise, it's cheaper to buy an existing apartment building and turn it into what their needs are than to build something from scratch, and time-wise also, it's just faster because these apartments already exist, so you don't have to wait 2 years for something to come up. Now, Executive Director Gary Fisher of Multifamily Northwest, which is the Metro Housing Association, was quoted as saying, with permitting times lagging around the Portland metro region and development costs soaring, which it certainly seems like purchasing existing units is more efficient use of taxpayer resources. So that's where they're sitting at with this. And even though everyone around them is like, no, and everyone thinks the ballot will be controversial somehow, I think they're still going to go forward with it. But before I share even more details of what Metro is thinking, what other people are thinking about this, what do you guys think?
I think that what's crazy is to think about, we all passed this tax, we're like, yeah, let's help the homelessness. And now here we are, we have $400 to $450 million just sitting around and no one can figure out how to spend it.
It's so annoying.
Fast enough. They're not meeting the deadlines. You know what I mean? So that's also like, they were like, we're going to end homelessness. And then they're like, but we actually have no idea how to do it. So like, that's just that's the part that always gets me with just talking about that there. Mm-hmm. So I would love to have them figure it out. But also, Metro's in this very secretive conceptual phase. It's all kind of closed off behind doors right now. And they're also just all quietly talking about what is in the realm of possibilities. And of course, what you brought up, Claudia, is that maybe buying apartments that are for cheap right now can be part of that. But I guess one thing to note is that existing apartment buildings, doesn't mean that they're necessarily turnkey, because for instance, you don't know the status of the HVAC system, the water system. Do you need a new roof? What is the status of the dishwashers and dryers and washing machines in them? Are you going to have to get all of those up to snuff? Basically, there's a lot more to it when it comes to capital expenditures to make sure that it's a viable option. So even if you're looking at a sticker value here, you might have to add another $100,000 per unit in order to make sure you could actually get people moved in and you wouldn't have the roof fallen in a short period of time.
Those are some of the critics, just so you know,
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's some of the critical, feedback is basically that, how do we know your numbers are legit?
Right. And anytime you buy a building, any type of investor is always going to look at capital expenditures. And you have to be really, really mindful of what those look like because they can add up quick. You're getting out, units to the street way faster.
Way faster. And that's the thing. It's either time or money. What were you going to say, John? I saw you breathe in real deep.
Sometimes you can anticipate that I'm trying to jump into the ring. I mean, it's just so interesting to think about this as a perspective on how our region changes and how policy kind of lags behind that, right? Because if you go back 5 or 10 years, the idea of, oh crap, there's not enough housing, we have more people moving into this region, and the only way to fix it is by building new housing, was like a sort of forward-thinking idea, you know? Mm-hmm. We knew that it was going to take a long time to develop this stuff, so we started getting the gears in motion to make that happen. We've just had this change in the last, 5 or 10 years where now there are these buildings that had been developed that are decreasing in value, and regional governments are really slow to pivot. And then they're like, oh crap, we have all this money that we allocated for this thing, but we need it for that thing because reality has changed.
Right. Well, Metro spokesman Nick Christensen says that even if Metro were to move forward with this plan, it wouldn't fix the root problem that everyone knows exists, which is the lack of housing supply itself. So obviously, this is his quote, obviously we have a regional need and a market failure to build new housing for Oregonians with lower incomes. So no matter what, they're expecting that they still need to build even more housing, even if they were to buy all these buildings. But from some digging around, there are critics who worry Metro won't be able to handle the plan, which is just like, damn.
Legit.
Also,
yeah.
people just seem to hate Metro for existing in the first place. I will say that our form of local government is very unique to Portland. Most major cities don't have another organization on top of the county, managing several counties. It's not a thing,
But only a couple components of that county.
Yeah, exactly. Not the full counties, just enough to confuse everyone. So everyone ends up going to Carmen Rubio, They're like, who does this? At the end, it's just Carmen with her little headset, just making a 12-year-old boy cry. You know what I mean? And she's like, oh, who needs something now? All right, let's go.
That was amazing.
Sorry. That's what I want to think is happening, because she's so sweet. Okay, anyhow, that's the critics. That's the criticism. It's just like, Metro, you failed us before. And I think the counties are also just like, why, guys? Like, let us figure this out on ourselves. But I personally just want more in-depth reasons as to why the counties are not for this. Because all I've been reading is just that, like, it's money. There's not enough money. Because on paper, this does seem like a good idea. But if 3 counties are against it, I'm assuming something is up. Like, what else,
I feel like anytime, it's like, imagine you give a kid a $5 bill and they're like, oh my God, I'm rich. And then you take it right back and they're like,
yeah,
they have all these ideas of what they're going to do, but they don't really, I don't know. I just feel like they have their money.
Such a good analogy.
It's very childish, right?
Yeah.
Because it should be about what's going to be best for people. And I think that that's what this whole conversation that we've had today is it really should be about people, even though we're talking about properties. But yeah, that's who's really at stake here. I think that it will be interesting come late spring, early summer to see what Metro comes out with when they finally announce what they have been, secretly talking about for months now.
Mm-hmm. I do think it's an exciting opportunity, though, where just looking at some of the numbers of how inexpensive some of these buildings are. Like the article points out this building on Northeast MLK that sold for $200,000 per unit. Metro budgets between $400,000 and $500,000 per unit to develop new affordable housing. And the idea that a regional government stepping in to take advantage of these deals is something that can probably only happen within a short amount of time within this period. And I'd so much rather have them do it and fumble the ball than just some private developer come through and turn them into the next wave of dumbass luxury apartments with
that no one can afford
VR rooms in 2030. You know what I mean?
I was literally going to say that there's literally VR rooms in apartment buildings.
Wait,
where?
Not one that I lived in, but
I just made that up. That actually exists.
No, it actually is real. It's the first time that I've ever been in a hot air balloon was in that VR headset.
Oh my God.
Yes, there's rock walls and VR rooms and movie rooms, and that's the problem. Because the permitting process in Portland is so expensive, it does not pencil out for a private investor to come in and build, C-level apartments. So they're just doing A+ apartments everywhere with these crazy VR headsets, and it doesn't create an equitable market for everybody to live in.
Well, ultimately, I want there to be more transparency in the Metro government because I feel like the opaqueness of how things work, it's always just Portland city government, you're like, it's just, to me, it's more circuitous than it is shady and hard. You're just like, someone's like, what? It was on the site. It's like a PDF, and you're like, oh, I'm sorry, sir. Who would know about You're nodding your head. You know what I'm talking about, Elise.
Yes,
when
I
you
do.
ask someone where this is and they ask, and they don't act huffy, but there's a bit of huff where they're like, we put it there. And I was like, on a PDF buried in 3 paragraphs with a hyperlink? How was anyone supposed to find that? Anyhow, so there you have the city government. Then you have the county, which is a little bit more just like, what's going on there? And then you have the metro where you're like, I have no clue what they do and what's going on there, right?
Breach.
So anyhow, what I'm hoping is, I will say it again, John, that the charter comes in and just helps break down these walls, because what the heck is going on, I always go back to that. I feel like I end every Friday Roundup with a pulpit discussion of me just being like, just break down the walls of our local government. Well, you guys, thank you so much for hanging out and talking through these stories with me. Elise, this was like the best first guest performance, I believe, that we've ever had. I say performance like you danced for us, but it was such a pleasure to host you. I hope you're able to come back.
Oh, I would love to. I had a blast with you guys.
So in our excitement to end the show, we actually forgot to ask Elise what her plans were for celebrating 503 Day, but she was nice enough to tape us a response, and here it is.
Okay, so how am I going to spend 503 Day to celebrate being a Portlander? Pretty easy to start off my mornings, because it's how I do every morning. It's with some meditation. After that, then I transition into hanging out with my beloved bumblebees while tending my vegetable garden. As I'm also working towards becoming a certified backyard habitat, #goals. Then after that, I'll stroll to the top of Mount Tabor with everybody else, only to slightly get lost on the way down, always trying to navigate, figuring out where I parked. Then I'll probably head over to Anyi Yoga in Selwood to do some Amazonian breath work and get real woo-woo with a bunch of strangers. Then head across the street and slam a Selwood burger at PDX Sliders. And then after that, who knows? Maybe a casual cameo at Sassy's for a nightcap.
Well, there you have it, folks. Elise's perfect 503 Day. And if you have any suggestions of your own, please send them in at portland@citycast.fm. That's all for today here on CityCast Portland. Thank you so much for listening. Our executive producer is John Atariani. Our producers this week were Julia Fiaioni, Natalie Rivera, and AKL Mumin. Our newsletter editor is Rachel Monahan, and our host is me, Claudia Meza. Original music by Jenny Conley and Steven Drizos. Additional music by Epidemic Sound and All the Kimonos. We'll be back Monday morning with more from around the city. Until then, see you at Slim's.